To see everyone today. Thank you so much for joining us. Just before we begin this event, we'd like to acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of our various regions. A land acknowledgement is a critical step towards working with Native communities to secure meaningful partnership and inclusion in the stewardship and protection of our cultural resources and homelands. Our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of Indigenous peoples. We honor and are grateful for the land we occupy and recognize the ongoing damage of settler colonialism. Let's take a moment to honor these ancestral grounds that we are collectively gathered upon and support the resilience and strength that all Indigenous people have shown worldwide. I am on the traditional territory of the Kumeyaay people. I encourage you to name and acknowledge the Native peoples where you are located in the chat box. And there is a link that you can find there to find your location. So on behalf of our program committee, I'd like to welcome you all to this Re-Museum program. Recover, Reimagine, Revive. What does Re-Museum mean to you? Thank you for joining this virtual conversation to delve deeply into the challenges that the museum field is currently facing and how our field can move forward. In this series, members of our program committee are in dialogue with special guests who have knowledge or experience to help us consider new perspectives or explore new directions for our field. Let me remind you that CAM has a board-approved code of conduct for participation in our programs. A link was sent to you in the confirmation for this program, but Lacey is also going to paste a link in the chat box for your convenience. CAM is committed to providing a safe, inclusive, and respectful learning and networking experience for everyone. So take a look at your chat boxes. Now I'd like to introduce our program committee member who will lead today's discussion, Joaquin Ortiz, Director of Innovation at the Museum of Photographic Arts.
Thank you, Tomoko. And again, I'm glad for all of you to be here, and I'm glad and very excited today to be conducting this interview with a group of very critical leaders in our field, Museum Workers Speak. So this is a great conversation for us to be having. It's something we've been talking about at our conference, and now is a great time to follow up and discuss this as we move forward, especially during this time of the pandemic. I'd like to go ahead and pass it back over to Museum Workers Speak so they can go ahead and introduce themselves.
Thank you so much, Joaquin, and thank you so much to CAM for inviting us to be a part of this really exciting program. My name is Gwendolyn Fernandez. I use she, her pronouns. And to provide a little visual description, I am a white woman. I have long brown hair with some gray streaks. I'm wearing some bright yellow earrings today, and my museums are not neutral black t-shirts. And always a thank you to Latanya Autry and Mike Morosky for donating the proceeds of this campaign to the Museum Workers Relief Fund. We are very grateful. I'm coming to you from my home in Phoenix, Arizona, which is located on the ancestral territories of the Keel, O'odham, and Hohokam people. There are windows off to my left, to my backyard, a bookshelf off to my right, and a wooden ceiling above my head. I am a recovering museum educator. I was laid off from my position back in April. And I have 14 years of working mostly in education and visitor services departments. So I will pass things off to my colleague, Hannah.
Hi, my name is Hannah Heller, and thank you to CAM for having us. We're excited for this conversation. My pronouns are she, hers. I am located in New York City on the ancestral lands of the Lenni Lenape people. I am a white woman. I have brownish green eyes and brown hair that's sort of pulled back. I gave myself a very bad haircut and I don't know what else to do with it. I'm wearing a light blue sort of V-neck top, and I'm just surrounded now, I'm realizing, by apartment clutter, art stuff, furniture, plants, and a window to my left. I'm a museum educator in New York. I work mostly on a contractual basis with different art museums for the last 10 years. And so while a lot of my contracts have been really eliminated. My hours have been significantly reduced since March, and now slowly creeping back. But it's definitely been a ride. I'm going to pass it off to Kate.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate Swisher, and I use she, her pronouns. And I am coming to you here from Chicago, which is the ancestral homeland of many different communities, which I listed in the chat. But I would also like to share a link to Chicago's American Indian Center, their donation page. I've been hearing a lot about land acknowledgements lately, and kind of the movement to push them past just acknowledgement and toward action. So with that in mind, I'm asking everyone to consider making a small donation to the American Indian Center or to the center of your choice today, if you are able. And then since everyone is giving visual descriptions, I'll go ahead and do that. I am a white cisgender woman with short, dark, curly hair, blue eyes, and pink glasses. I am wearing a very cozy green sweater and a gold necklace. And I am sitting here at my dining room table, where you may have noticed I'm being repeatedly Zoom bombed by my naughty gray cat, Morris. And I work at the Field Museum in Chicago as an assistant exhibitions registrar.
Thank you. I also want to say Morris is welcome here. You know, in the spirit of inclusivity, you know, the pets are supporting us during this time, so you know they're always valuable and helping us as well. So if Morris pops in, that's going to be okay. And same for everybody else's pets as well. Well, let's get to it. You know, where I would like to start is if the three of you can tell us, how did Museum Workers Speak begin, and how has it evolved over time?
Sure, so I'll take that first question. And I just want to also say that although the three of us are representing Museum Workers Speak here today, we consider ourselves a collective, of which the three of us are just a very small part. So, you know, it's a difficult task to speak for such a much larger group. So just the three of us here today. But I can tell you a little bit about how we came about back in 2015. It actually started with a rogue session at the American Alliance of Museums annual conference in Atlanta. So rogue session, meaning it wasn't sanctioned by AAM and it wasn't under the auspices of AAM. It took place in a small gallery where over 75 museum workers gathered in Atlanta to talk about labor practices in museums. You know, things we're all familiar with, such as low pay, overwork, long hours, unpaid internships, lack of diversity, overwhelmingly white male leadership, you know, hostile work environments for non-white workers, lack of support for equity work, and the list kind of goes on and on. These are all issues we're probably very familiar with here on this call. But there was a bit of a taboo against talking about them back in 2015, and especially in kind of officially sanctioned spaces. So it was really important to get this conversation going. And the rogue session drew a lot of attention. So it kind of coalesced organically, but it turned into kind of an established monthly Twitter conversation of like #MuseumWorkersSpeak. As well as spawning a variety of local meetups across the country. I know we had chapters in the Bay Area, Chicago, Boston, DC, and Miami, I think, all meeting to have conversations about kind of how we can fix these labor practices. We kind of were more of an online presence for the last few years up until May 2020, when thanks to the efforts of Paula Santos and Alyssa Greenberg, they kind of reactivated the group in order to respond to what we were seeing as the effects of the COVID crisis in museums, with these massive layoffs and like really brutal pay cuts and a lot of just horrible things that were primarily affecting frontline and BIPOC staff. So with that in mind, Museum Workers Speak launched its Museum Workers Mutual Aid Fund. in May of 2020. And through that, we have been successful in raising over $80,000 to date from over 800 donors, largely museum workers themselves. And we've been able to use that money to provide $500 gifts to 130 recipients and counting. So we are still actively raising funds right now. That said, I think we've been doing a lot of soul searching about what's next for us, you know, like in addition to and beyond mutual aid, because we've seen from the stories that have come pouring in from our applicants and supporters, there's just so much more need out there than a $500 gift can fix, even if we could get to everyone. So we're thinking about next steps, and we had a listening session back in July with over 90 participants who kind of have given us some thoughts about where to go next. You know, a lot of people are interested in organizing and unionizing at their museums, so we really want to support those worker-led organizing efforts. We're really interested in kind of spreading the model of collective leadership, which is what we have within our collective, you know, a group of 6+ members all making decisions through conversation. And we also are really interested in building a space for current and what we call recovering museum workers to engage in a community of collective care.
So clearly the collective nature of this is deeply vital to us making forward progress here. So what are the priorities of the collective today?
So as I said, kind of thinking about beyond the mutual aid fund, we are really interested in looking at ways to build that community online. So, and we've talked about different ways of doing that. You know, we're still kind of thinking about whether that's, you know, a Slack channel, if it's even a discussion board or programming, you know, all of the above, having information sessions on how to organize at your museum, kind of bringing in thought leaders on that, people who've done it themselves to kind of give guidance, and just providing space for folks who have been burned by museums in one way or another, been laid off or in some way, you know, really received trauma from museum work, for them to gather and kind of heal together.
So help us understand what makes us mutuals, you know, and how that shapes our work, both now and as we continue to move forward.
So this is Hannah. I'll take this one. So we've been really particular from the outset of distinguishing our model of mutual aid versus a charity model, which is kind of predicated on a bunch of like rich people getting together and them deciding what different communities of need, as opposed to people, workers deciding together, what do we need, and creating a solution together. We were very inspired by prison abolitionist models, groups who really are community-led, community-focused, and for workers by workers. We're all museum workers ourselves, and saw this need and rallied around it. So another important aspect of that is this idea of radical trust. And so there's no means testing. That's part of our mutual aid project. If you tell us you need, we believe you. There is a question on our application that asks people, what made you decide to apply? Not so that we can be like, well, this person needs clearly more than this, but in case people wanted to tell us their stories. In many cases they did. And reading through that data is, it just really defines clearly the emotional qualities, the real stories, the real people behind mutual aid and behind this idea of who our mutuals are. And I think the truth is, if you're a museum worker, you're in mutuality with us, whether you think you are or not. If you haven't been laid off, don't think you're not next. This is something that's affecting all of us. And Gwyneth's going to speak a little bit into like the things that hold us back from being in solidarity with each other. But I think the more pressing or the bigger bummer of a question is who isn't in who isn't mutual with us. And this process is really illuminated, like Kate was saying, there's like over 800 contributions. Many of those people have given twice. I think our average donation at one point was like $70. It's just to say that this is a real grassroots, just people helping people. And it is not as if there are like institutions or like AAM, for example, is like not knocking down our door to give us money. That is not the case. One institution has, I should say, the Intuit Art Center has generously given, but it really clearly is workers working for and with other workers. We spoke about this a little bit at our Deaf to Museums presentation, which is recorded if you want to check that out as well. But this idea of when does mutual aid end, if you frame it as something as workers doing with other workers, we also realize, and this is, I think Kate was speaking to also, that these workers' needs are going to evolve. And we want to be really responsive going forward to what mutual aid or a community of care can provide beyond money. We always want to be providing money for as long as we need, but also as long as museums don't prioritize workers' rights, there's going to be a need for mutual aid. And whether it looks like cash or whether it looks like exchanges of goods and services or creating community and connectivity in that way, which I think is something also people really need. That's something we have an eye towards. So I'm not sure it ever ends. COVID or otherwise, I hope this is a model that can be continued beyond us, after us, and hopefully one day we won't need, but I don't know how hopeful I am about that. So yeah, I think this idea of mutual aid has longevity and will be around for a long time.
I mean, all of you are really touching upon that need for collective action and some of that lack of that has happened over time, and how you're organizing that, and making, again, this mutualism, this idea of collectivity and equity. So what are some of them, the reservations, norms, power dynamics that hold us back from talking about labor, and why are we afraid of it? Why? What causes that?
This is Gwen talking now. Thank you for asking that question, Joaquin, because I think we really have to talk about what our fears are and what is holding us back from really having open, honest conversations. And I wanted to speak to this just because, I still consider myself a baby activist. It's been a journey, and I appreciate my colleagues, both within Museum Workers Speak and others who I've worked with in my former institutions, who've really been a part of my learning and growth and evolution. And I think we're all on a continuum of becoming awake to these practices that are just really harmful and causing a lot of trauma. So there are folks who've been in this work for a really long time, and there are a lot of us who are, I think, waking up to the need to recognize that we are mutuals, and together we are stronger. But to the question about reservations and norms that hold us back, I think one thing in museums, I think many of us are kind of bought into the systems and hierarchies that have been endemic to museums for so long. We think that, we do certain things, we perform in certain ways, we meet certain expectations, we're going to continue to be rewarded and feel fulfilled. And we've seen that the institution can let you go with a 5-minute phone call. And I think alongside that is just there's not really a history of collective organizing and labor, a deep history within the museum sector to fall back on. It's one that we're really building more recently. And we've seen just in 2020 alone, the movement towards unionization, and seeing many museums starting workers starting to come together to form unions. And I think that's leading to a new identity as workers that we didn't really have, and that's reinforced by our museum silos, that we don't necessarily see what's in common between the different departments, where we are all facing different but similar challenges, and that when we remain in those silos, it's hard to really, even within our own institutions, collectively organized, not to mention across the sector as well. So those sort of institutional silos, but that are reinforced by class dynamics that are just woven into museums. And you know, there's a very real and it's, again, very real fear of retaliation, you know? And on the surface, I mean, it might just be fear of being told no at first when you start pushing back, but then alongside that, are you going to become stagnated? Are you going to be let go? And that retaliation, I think, is something we, whether you're aware of it or not, is that fear is there.
So talk to us more about some of those social dynamics, like those power structures that are making that happen.
Yeah, we could talk all about that, and I'm sure you know, those who are here live with us and those that might be watching this at a later point have their own story that they could share about how they've experienced this. And probably there's a whole class we could teach on this. But you know, these exist in big and small ways. I mean, they're existing on you know, large institutional spaces. Like, we just look at who makes up museum boards, for example. They're predominantly white and wealthy, and those are who are making the decisions right now. Many of whom are making decisions about who gets let go and how the museum responds to the very real financial challenges that we're in. But they're making those decisions without maybe a collective of voices and diverse voices to assist. And, you know, and that also comes to pay disparities, you know, just seeing the vast inequities between leadership pay and pay of workers. And even in this time when many of us are being asked to take pay cuts, those are not proportional pay cuts. They're affecting those making, just to bring in some of our statistics from the fund, I think it was 30%, and Hannah and Kate can help me out, 30% told us they're making less than $40,000 a year. So, and if you compound that, I think, you know, a vast majority are just not making a living wage doing this work that we're supposed to believe that we love, and we do it because we love it, right? And, you know, within daily practices, we're seeing this, you know, everything from hiring processes to dress codes. I mean, our internal Slack lit up yesterday with an Ask a Manager post about, you know, checks to see if you're wearing shoes when you're on your Zoom meetings. I mean, things that are just placing expectations that we all uphold a predominantly white culture. And that is also just pervasive in the culture of museums generally. It's predominantly white institutions. And I'm speaking as a white woman who bought into and was complicit in many of those systems for many years, and have been, and I'm on a journey of really understanding that process. But so I, you know, seeing that our, you know, colleagues, our Black and Indigenous and Latinx and Asian colleagues who face microaggressions every day, come to work every day from their own institutions and colleagues to visitors to the public. So it's everywhere, and once you start to see it, you're not going to unsee it.
And complicity is such an important word within chain movements for all of us to understand how we play a role within all this, even when we're trying to make change, right? And you know, when I think about some of these things, especially in regards to equity, and inequities lead to health problems, if you will, not like physical health problems, although that's an outcome, but economic health problems, these things, which means that these laborers can't do what they need to do to make healthy museums, if you will, you know? Passion and love don't pay the bills. You know, so the thing is, that's what labor unions are for, is to protect the workers, to advocate for them, to set up structures so that they are taken care of and that they are healthy, if you will. So why are so few museums unionized? How would a unionized workforce impact the museum field?
This is Kate answering. Yeah, I think that Gwen really nailed it with a lot of the reasons why there are so few museum unions. There is this lack of worker identity, or like the attempts to make our labor invisible or say that it's a labor of love. There's a lack of culture of candid discussion about labor practices and about wages. departments are very siloed, as Gwen also mentioned. I know that for me personally, working in the exhibitions department in like the very specific nook that is registration, I have so little contact with the frontline staff that it's really easy to be in the dark about what your colleagues in other departments are going through, which makes it very difficult to organize. And then again, that fear of retaliation is so real. We have seen time and time again that management does try to crush any attempts to organize or change the power structures in museums. And, you know, even when workers do try to unionize, the leadership hires union busting firms, which is something we saw recently with the Philadelphia Museum of Art. So yeah, there are a lot of roadblocks in place to overcome.
And Kate, you're bringing up a really important point that, you know, power structures that exist like this inherently find ways to protect themselves, right? You know, that's a big part of why labor organizing is a struggle in museums. So, you know, what sometimes can help is other power structures involving themselves in these practices. So for instance, like, let's be theoretical here. What would the impact of AAM accreditation measures look like if they required that you had to address your labor practices?
Hi, this is Hannah again. So actually AAM does address different organizational and like worker stuff standards, and I'm going to drop a link into their different areas of the like beautiful language around leadership and organizational structure, collection stewardship, all these like really important things that according to them should be, oh no, I just got out of our, should be considered when considering accreditation, and yet are apparently not being enforced. And so, you know, the question becomes not where are they, but why aren't they enforcing them? And so it really goes back to this idea, I think, of museums and our professional organizations wanting to present themselves as, you know, for the public good, and we're doing good, and we're good people, but without turning the lens inward and looking at, well, how are we actually treating our people? And this comes back all the way to where Museum Workers Speak started, about turning that lens inward, that museums are, again, professing to be these positive, do-good organizations when they are like violently mistreating the people who work within them. So it would be huge if AAM actually addressed this. It would align our missions. It would actually mean that we're doing our missions and aligning with ourselves with doing good and being good. But again, I don't know, maybe you just caught me on like a skeptical day, but I'm not sure I see that happening anytime soon. And I think it really comes back to a lot of things, but I think AAM has really put themselves in a double bind by holding themselves up as an organization that represents both people, individuals, and institutions. You can have an institutional membership and also an individual one. And when those values and interests become at odds, AAM chooses the institution every time, all day. So where does that leave workers? And what might a professional organization look like that prioritizes that? That's something that Museum Workers Speak is sort of looking towards, and listening very much to workers' needs, and definitely putting that question out there of what would a like worker solidarity that had power to demand better treatment look like?
And we're in this challenging moment, right, where, because you're right, a lot of us feel like we're doing good, and museums do a public good, but we're clearly, what you and others are bringing up is this need that there's more work to be done. And so, you know, we're in this moment in time also where there's all this accountability, you know, these accountability campaigns, if you will, that are helping to amplify the voices of museum workers. So how can we then maximize the effect of that in order to enact institutional change?
This is Gwen again. Yeah, it's been almost head spinning to watch all of the new campaigns that are popping up all the time. And I think as we talk about this particular moment, we must recognize that this moment is built on the work that came before this. So acknowledgement to Adrienne Russell and Aaliyah Brown with hashtags Museums Respond to Ferguson, who really asked our field to turn that lens of social justice inward and really examine internal practices in museums. And there's so many others. And actually, I'm going to drop a link as well. I encourage, Dr. Portia Moore gave an opening talk to the inaugural Deaf to Museums session back in August. And she really laid a very clear foundation and called in, you know, all of the groups in the history of the work that has really led to this moment. So that's a wonderful talk. She's the first speaker up on that day. To recommend checking that out. So this new wave of accountability, Change the Museums and Mass Action and so many others are asking for institutions to really do the work that some have even told us they want to do, but we're not seeing it. It's not tangible yet. And some of that might be it's happening internally, and we know institutions take a long time to shift. You know, they're not nimble institutions by design. So we're not going to see massive change overnight, but we're seeing it far too slowly. And so I think one thing we've talked about internally is also just recognizing this moment is reminding us that we need all of the tools in the toolbox. You know, we need folks, you know, organizing on the ground and unionizing. We need folks advocating for workers. We need, you know, boycott campaigns. We need, you know, labor strikes. We need, you know, ways to tell our stories. I mean, we all might have differences of opinions about the effectiveness of those different strategies. But the truth is every tool in dismantling systems that are harmful and oppressive, you know, we need them all. And so I think what we can really do in this moment, and what some of these campaigns are really asking us to do, is to look at the statements that many museums made in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. There was just this rush to put out on social media, you know, statements of solidarity, but so many lack any acknowledgement of museums' own complicity and in those systems. And we've seen, you know, so far, and it's been a short period of time, we've seen not much movement on an action behind those statements. So I think something we can really all do is, from our position inside our museums and within our collective bodies, and as much as we can encourage our publics to really ask museums to do that work that they say they want to do. And this is where it takes the waking up of all of us to our collective power. If we all did that, they would. I am the more hopeful voice oftentimes, but I think that momentum, we've just got to keep that up and keep supporting one another in that process.
And Gwen, as your shirt so importantly reminds us, museums are not neutral. You know, and so you know, we have to take these steps, the internal reflection practices, you know, even at a leadership level. Myself as a leader has to keep those things in mind. You know, this idea of objectivity and that we are somehow free of those things, it doesn't truly exist. The sociological studies show that doesn't really happen. So how do we start taking those steps? And so what I wonder with all of you is, do you have examples of institutions that are actively working to improve these things, especially around labor?
You know, we thought about this question a lot, and I think the truth is that, you know, maybe some institutions are better than others, but the radical work that's required right now to see the change that we really need is not happening there. It's really happening like on the ground, unions, organized staff, open letters, calling out board members. I think that's where the work is really happening. And there's some great examples of those and like amazing unionizing endeavors, and in the face of huge resistance by institutions, which should tell you everything you need to know. But I think that's where we really see the work happening, is not coming from institutions as much as workers coming together.
Yeah, I mean, as you touched upon before, these statements that come out, and then, you know, that was a while ago now. Where's the action? You know, it seems like there's internalized processes that aren't still happening yet, even though there was, you know, commitment statements about that sort of stuff. You know, and so what are those next steps? And it sounds like it's internal work, because there's a lot of external work happening, including what all of you are doing. So, you know, the expectation to enact social change through a museum, it heavily falls towards education departments frequently. So, you know, what does enacting social change look like when it's across the museum? When it's not just the people who are public facing, but it's also the departments that are doing those internal works also, and board, donors, all those other areas.
It looks like a healthy organization. You know, I think, and this is something I think we'd love to hear, you know, from those who gathered today, you know, from their perspectives, and maybe they're seeing this work happening in other departments and how it looks. You know, I was a part of organizing a diversity and access and inclusion task force at my prior institution that really was the first time we were bringing voices from all different departments together to have these conversations and just kind of figure out where everybody was. And I think, you know, first thing is just having every department show up and understanding that they have a role to play, and they may not know what that role is. It might just be listening for a little while and understanding and hearing the needs of other workers in other departments. But yeah, if we were all doing that reflective practice and reiterate, you know, that iterative practice, like this isn't going to be perfect. Like we're not going to get it right the first, second, third, fifth time. I mean, I think one thing we've talked about is we know, you know, this work that we're all engaged in, like we're doing it now, but we're not doing necessarily just for ourselves. We're doing it for the workers that are going to come through museums in the future. These are institutions that are set up to preserve, right? They even though there's a call for abolition of museums, like they've got deep roots. And so as we do this work, we look towards those that will come behind us and carry it forward. Maybe Kate or Hannah or any of our guests today might have some other thoughts.
It's so valuable that you say that, because, right, like, you know, it's all of us, including all those of us on the call now. So that's a really important transition. We have about 15 minutes left. Let's turn it over to some questions. So again, as Lacey mentioned, if you'd like to either use the raise hand feature, or if you'd like to add things into the chat, Lacey and I will moderate that, and we can have some questions in front of Gwen and Hannah here. And Kate, sorry about that.
Or examples you've seen in your institutions of like where some good is happening. I could use some hope today. So if anyone, yeah, maybe has examples of what social change might look like, particularly if you're in a, I don't know, I imagine there's like departments where you think like, oh, well, I'm just a registrar, so this doesn't apply to me, or I think it's clear that that all of this stuff is also intertwined, and it does. Yeah, I don't know, examples of good things, questions, anything bubbling up? Or we can keep complaining.
I'll go maybe. I'm not sure if this is what you're looking for. My name's Cody. I work at Laguna Art Museum. And sort of as you described it just now, it made me think of our museum's internship program. We're a pretty small museum, and so a lot of change happens quickly, and some of it in terms of this happens slowly. But in our internship program, we have a sort of formal thing with a local university in which sort of diversity and equity are sort of baked into that program. And so in our perspective, or mine at least, it's sort of, for us, is trickling up in that way. That's sort of a first place where sort of external stakeholders helped us sort of start that process in one area. And I think that may be informing how we work otherwise.
And have you seen interns transitioning into paid staff and employees, and seeing that pipeline really in action? I know that's, you know, an area of work that you know, the Ford Foundation was funding for a really long time, that we saw that funding just really dry up and annihilate a lot of the work that had been done there. But yeah, I'm curious, like, you don't have to, I'm not putting you on the spot, Cody, but just like, just really thinking about how that sort of continues through.
It's a great question. I think about a year and a half ago, our internship program became a paid program. So the only interns we have are being paid with a partnership with our university. So while we're sad not to accept every intern who would like to be there, we're really, really proud that we can, offer our interns a stipend. And so while we're a small staff, we don't have openings very often, but at least while those interns are with us, they're being paid for their time.
We have a question that came in from the group. This is from Karen Kinzel, our former board president and a wonderful board member. So she's asking, and I'm really interested in knowing about this too. So talk to us more about the collaborative leadership model, because that's not something that we're usually used to, right? We tend to be more hierarchical. And so, so talk more about how that's working with all of you, and how the participants, the ideas, how that gets, so we can get something going that maybe even in our own institutions.
I mean, this is definitely, I don't want to like so Hannah, Kate, just like jump right on in. I think this is something we're actively thinking about, and how to document it and how to continue to talk about it and share it. But just for example, yesterday we were, what, three hours on a Zoom call, collaboratively writing some work that we're hoping to see come into existence. So, we're just constantly both looking to each other for support, and all of our meetings start with just a check-in, like to see how everybody's doing, but also to call in and acknowledge whatever we're bringing into the space, and acknowledging that we all have many identities and things happening. So it's coming up with just a respect and an understanding that we all are humans. And then, making these decisions collaboratively and trusting each other enormously, that someone will step up when someone needs to step back, and that we can have that play. And I'll plug, I know Mike Morosky has been doing a lot of writing on the Art Museum Teaching blog about different modes of leadership. I think that's an area of scholarship he's really interested in. But we're just seeing that on some of this play out on our level. But Hannah, Kate, add on, please.
Yeah, I think the only way I can really think to like describe it is, instead of like one person having final say on stuff, it's like a couple of people. and like, yes, there's I don't know that, like, I don't think we think in terms of like agree, disagree, but rather like, I have this thought and I have a different idea about this idea. Where is there a middle ground? Maybe that takes different thoughts and ideas and approaches into account. And Gwen was speaking to something that's really important, that it's become a space where each of our like approaches, personalities, and skill sets can be applied in areas where our strengths are. A single person can't be good at every leadership quality. That's just not possible. We have a leadership team. And so if, like, Gwen's our optimist, and sometimes we really need Gwen, and sometimes we need anger, and that's where I come in. But like, it's so important to have these things balanced out. And so just thinking about like implementing it at an organizational level, or formalizing it for an institution, I think leaders often think about the team that they're creating, and what might it look like instead of like, I'm creating a team, what might it look like if like the team creates a team? But also, thinking of Mike's writing and in general, I think we're coming to a place, just to be completely transparent, we're coming to a place, I think, where we need a little bit more professional development ourselves on what these different models are and what they might look like as we go forward. It's sort of just, we came together organically, it worked out, we did a bunch of stuff, and now it's like, okay, how can this be sustained? How do we bring in more people to this work? More hands, more stuff, but like, what does that look like? So it's, I'm not sure we have like all the answers. It's like worked out well so far. But going forward, I think we might need to, do even more thinking and reading and developing our approach.
Briefly, some follow-up on that. I mean, if you look at leadership studies around these ideas of collective leadership, it's really slow. And so what happens to them when we're in situations where museums, impacted by a lot of these financial crises, these other things, have this deep sense of urgency all the time, and it's hard for them to share that across the museum. How do you guys think that looks, even amongst yourselves?
Kate, you?
Well, I guess just the first thing that popped into my head when you said that is that I don't feel like museum leadership moves particularly quickly in most respects. Even when there is one person making top-down decisions, it feels like a very slow process in responding to current events. There is something to be said for our collective model that allows us to activate around specific issues as they come up, and people kind of, because we have this large network of people to draw on, we can kind of address these issues quickly. I don't see it as being a time suck, really. Like I can't imagine taking on the amount of work that we have done as this collective with fewer than the 6+ core members that we have. I think that it actually does allow us to be more nimble and responsive.
I also think, sorry, Gwen, go ahead.
Oh, you go Hannah.
That's, some projects do take time. Or I remember like when we were like getting ready to launch, we were like, okay, we're gonna launch on Monday. And then we just weren't ready. And then we were like, okay, let's do it next Monday. And that was okay. And I think it's part of working as a collective, and in this way is helpful to as a way to reject the urgency that white culture so often presents to our work. That yes, it's important and people are depending on us, but also balancing that against the values of just the quality of life and the amount of hours in a day, and what work needs to happen on Monday and what work can wait till next Monday, and just having that be like okay, and reminding each other that that's okay, and that like urgency is in of itself bad, but it's like too often it's the only thing, it's the only way we do our work. And I think it's a function of the collective that we are reminding each other that just where our priorities and values lie.
Yeah, and I would add, Hannah, you brought in, the idea that urgency is a characteristic of a white supremacist culture. And, I think we have to ask ourselves, who are we acting urgently for? And that can guide kind of, I kind of said, like some things, you want to get that out. You want to feel that sense of urgency and pressure is helping you to act in ways that are consistent with your values, right? But it also, you have to be mindful of like, when are you feeling that you're creating that sense, or you're buying into that sense of urgency that isn't actually helpful. It could be harmful. Like for example, all of the statements that museums put out, like collectively, it's like we just saw this like waterfall of them because it felt like we got to get our statement out, right? And maybe there wasn't like that. Sometimes those statements were harmful, and there wasn't time to just really sit and say, like, are we ready to make this statement? And what does this statement really mean for us? So I think, as Kate said, like institutions, they don't move swiftly often, but sometimes they move swiftly in ways that are dramatically harmful.
And what makes me hopeful, what I hear from you about this, is that there's a power of responsive action that can come from the group. And at the same time, there's a power in like taking care of each other and knowing each other are on the same boat, and not that there's not those power divisions sometimes that get created where it's kind of like, well, this is on you because I have this thing. That's amazing, because that's something that maybe we all need to take more into account as we continue moving forward to this. I also wanted to touch upon quickly, Anisha Gupta has so kindly put out that there's a follow-up program, not related to camp, wanted to be clear, but she's organizing a museum unionizing 101, and there's a link here in the comments. So if any of you are interested in that, please follow up and check that out. And thank you so much for sharing that. So we have a couple of minutes left. Is there any more questions from the group or museum workers speak as we're wrapping up? Is there anything else that you wanted to talk to us about before we get done here?
I have a question, and I'm sorry I can't raise my hand as the host, but I did jump in and ask a question. I was curious about whether Museum Workers Speak has been collaborating at all with some of the other organizing groups like Change the Museum or Mass Action, if you all, work together on anything.
There is a lot of overlap. I think within our group specifically, a lot of us came, like, I'll speak for myself, I won't speak for anybody else, but I came to a lot of this work through Mass Action. Both being introduced to it at one of my former institutions and then being able to be a part of a team to go to one of the convenings when they were happening in person. So I personally have been active in that group. And, while we are all in kind of our own spheres and spaces, there is, conversations that can happen, especially through social media. So some of the campaigns will, we'll talk to each other if there's an initiative that's being launched or something like that. But, there's points of overlap and there's points of operating in our own spheres. And it kind of goes back to that point of, we all have, we're all coming at this with different skills and sets and perspectives and tools that we want to use to enact change. And I think there has to be space for all of that. But Kate, Hannah, you guys want to?
Yeah, well, I think this is Kate. I have kind of like the opposite of Gwen's experience, where I found out about the Mass Action Accountability Campaign through, talking to folks within Museum Workers Speak, and kind of hopped on to some of those calls. And that was a very eye-opening experience. I think it's like there are just so many issues to tackle in the museum field that it requires, as Gwen said, and as we've been saying, kind of a diversity of tactics, all the tools in our toolbox. And it's good to, we hold each other up, we signal boost, we talk amongst our movements, but you almost have to, you almost have to pick a couple of things to prioritize. At least, I guess, only speaking for myself personally, kind of, there's just so much work to be done that for me, I have to pick where to put my energies. So it's nice to be part of a movement like Museum Workers Speak, where I feel like we're really like working on both concrete projects and also kind of these larger thought projects that hopefully will have a larger legacy.
I'm curious, I'm looking at the time, I'm curious if anyone has, are there any other activist group stuff happening that hasn't come up yet? I feel like we've heard Change the Museum, Mass Action. We should mention Museums and Race. All of his unionizing efforts.
I mean, all of the different individual campaigns that are happening in different museums. There are a number of them.
Well, I want to thank all of you once again. You worked very hard with us to organize all this on a pretty short timeline, so thank you so much. And we deeply appreciate this. I also want to thank all of you who have attended today. It's so nice to be able to have these conversations and share all this with you and to talk about these issues. I would like to pass it back over to Lacey and Tomoko so we can do our wrap-up.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Joaquin, and our three presenters. This topic is really important and I think urgent, right now. So this was a really great afternoon to get together and talk about it. Thank you so much for sharing. Great resources in the chat box. So I just wanted to turn everyone's attention to next week's program, which will have a different title, quite a different focus. We're looking at exploring virtual content, and that features Simon Delacroix from Google Arts and Culture, as well as Neil Stintler, I think, sorry, Balboa Park Online Collaborative. Sorry if my notes were a little bit small. I couldn't quite see the name, so hopefully that's okay. Be sure to check CAM's website, calmuseums.org/virtual content for more information and to register and just, stay abreast of what's happening in the field. So again, thank you so much for this afternoon's talk.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. And we also want to say thank you for providing payment to your speakers and for offering to donate that to our Museum Workers Relief Fund. And we know you mentioned some of your other speakers have offered to do the same. And to all of them, we are so grateful. That's what makes us mutual. So thank you all so much.
Yes, thank you so much. It's lovely to have the support. Thank you.